everyone, my name is Ingrid. I'm the events producer here at StartSpace. The City of Melbourne respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land, the Bunurong Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We are committed to our reconciliation journey because at its heart, reconciliation is about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples for the benefit of all Victorians. So welcome to tonight's event, everyone, Past Patents, Future Inventions, presented by StartSpace and the City of Melbourne for Melbourne Knowledge Week. Thank you to everyone here in the room, and also thank you to our audience at home on the live stream. Appreciate you tuning in to join us. Now, firstly, to introduce StartSpace. We're a business support service for early stage founders and business ideas, for free and for everyone. StartSpace is also a prototype for the library industry. Through StartSpace, libraries are backing new founders, supporting the community through rapid change in the future of work and fueling the Victorian innovation economy. We have a range of programs to help develop your business, including talks, events, workshops, mentoring and networking events, and hot desks right here in the State Library of Victoria, just behind me here, for those who are looking for a place to work in person. Whatever your background, age, industry or experience, we want to hear from you because we know that good ideas can come from anywhere. So check us out and apply online for StartSpace membership at startspacehq.com. So today we are going to have a few different talks. Firstly, we'll have a short talk by Greg Durand from the State Library of Victoria, speaking about historical patents in the collection. Following that, we'll have an informative short talk by Sylvan Brown from FB Rice, talking about intellectual property, trademarks and patents from a legal perspective. And to end the event, we have a panel discussion with Shannon Gilliland of Pronto, Geert Hendricks of Farmwell, Hans Chang from Fab9 and Belinda Smith from ABC Radio National moderating to talk about inventions, innovation, entrepreneurship and to share with you their journeys. Now, some quick housekeeping before I move on and introduce our first speaker. Please switch your mobile phones onto silent if you haven't yet. You'll find the bathrooms if you need them. Head out the glass doors and around the corner towards the elevators. If you need any help, please ask our team at the door for assistance. We are also filming and taking photographs. Please tell our team if you would prefer not to be in any photographs. So my colleague down the back, Simone, who's waving, if you'd rather not be in a photograph, just let Simone know. So thank you again, everyone. I'll now pass on to our first presenter, Greg Durand of State Library Victoria. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, so the State Library has patents in our collection in print from 1617 through to the end of the 20th century. Now, 1617 is because they were actually earlier letters patent, but James I revoked all the earlier ones when he became king in 1603, and so the first modern patent, such as it is, comes from 1617. Now, we don't actually have the 1617 version. We have print versions of those from the mid-1800s, and I'll get to why that is in just a moment. But these patents were under what they then called in the 1850s the old law, and getting a patent then was a 10 or more step process that I'm not actually going to bore you with right now. But what I am going to do is just read you a little bit from one patent that I found. The patent itself actually talks about the reasons why patents at all are granted. So I'm not going to try and do a 17th century accent for this one. But whereas we are informed that our well-beloved subject, John Dixon, gentleman, by his own industry and invention, hath devised a commodious instrument called a backstall, backframe or backskein, for ease and relief of such sick persons and others as are or shall be distempered or troubled with of backs through continual keeping or lying on their beds. Know therefore that we, being graciously minded as well in one convenient measure to reward the industry and pains of the said John Dixon in and about the premises, by appropriating to him for some term, 15 years, the fruit and benefit of his said invention. And also hereby to give encouragement to other our subjects to employ themselves and their studies in the investigation and finding out of such honest and lawful inventions as may tend to good use and service in these our realms. So I mentioned that we have the 1850s version, and this gentleman, Redmond Barry, is responsible for that and so many other things in this library. He was an inveterate collector, would get everything he could for the library except for children's books, fiction, and anything relating to horse racing. So he obtained a full set. In the old law, I think we have many hundreds of volumes of that at our Ballarat offsite store. And these were collated in a period of reform because a new Patent Act was passed in 1852, which codified things a little bit more, so you didn't have to go through that 10-step process, etc. But I found out that it wasn't an uncontroversial thing to create this new act. There are actually people who were abolitionists when it came to patents. One was Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who I have mostly included for his name and this next quote. But he was a prominent civil engineer, and the SS Great Britain, which was the largest iron steamship of its age, brought many, many colonists to Australia. But he said in 1851, "I have never taken out a patent myself, or ever thought of doing so, and I have gradually become convinced that the whole system of patents is one productive of immense evil. It impedes everything it means to encourage and ruins the class it professes to protect." However, some people think this is partly out of often frustration when he had to go through like 90 different patents of the screw that he wanted to put into the SS Great Britain. So he had varying view on patents throughout his life. Now, Victoria. Shortly after the 1852 Act in Great Britain was passed, the colonial legislative body was formed and they passed the Patent Act in Victoria 1854. So those of you who are able to see the collection view before would have seen these big handwritten volumes. They're very, very well loved, so we don't actually bring them out very often. There was one that I wanted to bring out tonight that I couldn't, and that was, and I have to phrase this very carefully, the world's first commercial ice-making machine. So that was created in Geelong. It was patent number 25, so very early on, 1855. And there is a story attached to this invention. So James Harrison, who was editor of the Geelong Advertiser, which he originally printed with this printing press that he tried to buy off John Pascoe Faulkner for £30 and ended up negotiating £300 in an interest in the paper. So Faulkner did very well out of that for something which he himself described as having the being superannuated. The story goes that he was a keen fisherman, thought often about keeping fish cold. One day, cleaning the type with ether, noticed that the metal was cooled and then went down a path to inventing this. So this is the ether vapor compression refrigeration machine, able to create 3,000 kilograms of ice per day. I've read early, we have a very early cookbook from another ice company, one in Adelaide from the 1860s, which actually has to tell people it's okay to drink cold drinks with ice in. Doctors say it's okay. So it was quite new to a lot of people. Rich people were able to get ice before this machine came in, though. They'd actually ship it from Boston, packed with sawdust. So Harrison, though, there is that light bulb moment. However, he did go to chemistry night classes in Glasgow before he came to Australia, and it was in Glasgow 80 years before then that there was a paper written by Dr. William Cullen on the refrigerative properties of evaporative cooling. So he may well have been thinking about this beforehand. He was certainly thinking of other reasons to have ice, apart from the first one that he sold was for a brewery. But he attempted in the 1870s to get a frozen beef trade going between Australia and Britain. It went terribly. He wasn't able to fit a machine in a boat, so they just tried to create a big thermos full of ice. Didn't work. And it was apparently not very nice when they opened it at the other end. So we did have another patent out though, which was for the sunshine harvester, which was patented in 1885 by Hugh Mackay. I'm from a farm, I'm from an agricultural background, but I only found out like a month ago that the combine harvester is called that because it combines different functions. But this was the first commercially viable combine harvester, I think, in the world. So he started in regional Victoria, that then moved to Braybrook, bought the Braybrook Implement Works and renamed it the Sunshine Harvester Works, which was the largest factory in Australia at the time. In 1907, the people of Braybrook Junction voted, let's rename it after the person who employs almost all of us, has built all these gardens and things for us, and so it became Sunshine. Also in 1907, the unions representing his workers took him to court, and he lost initially in terms of actually paying workers a living wage, which became the basis of a lot of decisions after the fact. So, the library has a particular collection which we're very thankful to the patent process of Victoria, and that is the Victorian Patent Office collection, copyright collection. We have thousands of images from 1870 to 1904 that came about because copyright was innately linked to the Patent Office in that time. You had to take it to the town hall, get it stamped, put in an album, and then you had your copyright. It wasn't just photographs, there was lithographs, all sorts of things, advertising material, and that would never have been saved unless it had been taken. So we're very thankful for these. There are quite a lot of Eugene Sandow in the collection in various attire, or not. But a lot of postcards, important things like that, views of Victoria are preserved there, unfortunately most of which with a great big copyright stamp across them. So I said 1904 for a reason, because Federation happened. So the Victorian patents only went to 1904 when federal legislation took over, and at this point, because we're in a federal situation, I'm actually going to talk about someone who's not actually from Victoria and someone I'd only learnt about in the last couple of weeks, and that is Myra Juliet Taylor, Myra Juliet Farrell. So she was a Sydney inventor. This is from 1915, that's from the Woman Voter, a Melbourne paper, where at that stage she had got, I think, 12 patents. They were for things like a non-stitch stud for clothing. She invented corsets for people with scoliosis and other things like that. But in 1916, she was thinking about the war and apparently created a thing called the defence fence, which she swore was able to stand up to machine gun fire. I can't find out what happened after that, but the Defence Department just took that away from her when that happened. That's something that I want to end with. It's just, is that I mentioned that we have them in print until 1999. We don't have the print versions anymore because most now patent research goes through AusPat. But I also wanted to include a photo of Myra there. So I hope I've sort of covered our collections. I tried to keep a few stories in there, but that's where I'm going to end for now. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Sylvan Brown. I'm a patent attorney with FB Rice, and I'll talk to you a little bit about intellectual property. Patents are a key part of intellectual property. We'll also touch on trademarks and designs and copyright a little bit. I've never come after somebody else who's given such a great historical introduction. I learned quite a lot from that, actually. Firstly, a little bit about FB Rice and who we are. We are a top-tier independent Australian intellectual property firm. We have a large number of patent attorneys and provide a full range of IP services. We have scientists and engineers amongst our group. So my background is in computer systems engineering. We have people who have specializations in immunology and organic chemistry and mechanical engineering, etc. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a definition of, well, what is intellectual property? Because, you know, the term IP might be bandied around a little bit and you might be going, well, what really is it? So it can be described as maybe various things: products of human intelligence and creation, intangible property that is the result of creativity. I like to say that, well, IP cannot protect ideas per se, because the idea is something you have in your head. You can't sue somebody else for having that idea in their head, but it's then the expression of that idea in some real form. That's what can be protected. So that's intellectual property in terms of how it can be protected under the law. So we'll talk a little bit about these types of IP and how they're different. We have some forms of registrable intellectual property and those forms that are not registrable. Patents, industrial designs, and trademarks are all ones that are registrable, and I'll give you some examples of what they might be in a little bit. Patents are about how things function, how they work. Designs are about how they look. Trademarks are about protecting a business reputation you've built up. Now, unregistrable types of IP include copyright. Now, it used to be that you could register copyright here. That's not the case anymore. It's something that automatically is created when you create what's called an eligible work. So if you write a novel and you do it and you haven't copied somebody else, that's yours. You own the copyright in it. Trade secrets are not registrable, and business names are also not registrable as forms of IP. So some examples of trademarks. It could be any sign that indicates the source of goods or services. Lots of logos and things you probably recognize there because they've done their job as representing the reputation that's been built up in that brand. It can also be for names such as FB Rice, logos, slogans such as "because you're worth it." Now, registered designs, I mentioned, they're about how things look. So it could be the AirPods on the left, presumably people recognize that as well, or for a piece of furniture, or for, say, a glassware like a Coke bottle, or possibly a nifty bottle product, which you might hear about a little bit later. So I didn't really give you examples of patents. You've seen a couple of those, but typically that's something like if you pull out your smartphone, that's chock full of patented technology, down to the semiconductors, the methods of fabrication, the cameras, all the software that goes into it, these TV displays. So there's functional things in all sorts of things that are patentable. There's chemical processes and the chemical products themselves. There's certain things in biotechnology that are patentable. So things that are generally tangible and functional, those are things that can be patented. So why should you care? Why does it matter? It is possible to not have any intellectual property protection, just rely on the free market. But generally, the government says, well, we think it's good to incentivize people to create new things. And so we want to give them some protection for the things that they create. And then typically, those only last a certain amount of time and the public gets it after that. For example, patents last 20 years as a maximum generally. So the idea is if you create something and you get a patent for it, you can have 20 years maximum to stop somebody copying you. And at the end of that, everybody gets it for free. So IP can be used to build and preserve a brand. It can be used for competitive advantage, And the key is exclusivity. It gives you exclusivity, as in the ability to exclude others from doing the same thing. You can use it to generate revenue, and this can be, for example, from licensing your intellectual property to somebody else who might want to use it. That can be quite lucrative. It can, if you're a startup, then intellectual property is definitely going to increase your company valuation. And now another key thing to keep in mind is that intellectual property can be, that's owned by others, can be used to impede your company activities or stop you from copying something that you might otherwise like to copy. Now, I've got a couple of tips here. The first being one of the things that I found in my experience of 23 years of doing this, that people don't always realize that you really ought to keep your inventions and your ideas to yourself initially until you figure out if you're going to try to register them. For example, if you talk about your invention that you want to get a patent for, you have publicly disclosed it, and now it's not new anymore, and it's going to be really tough to get a patent, and in fact, you may not be able to get a patent at all. So, if you do not, you can confidentially communicate it to somebody, that's okay, but don't publicly disclose it to even any one member of the public, because that can destroy the validity of a patent that you might seek for it. So, that non-confidential disclosure equals fairly significant lost value, particularly if it's for a key part of your business. So if you must talk to investors or partners, etc., keep it confidential. Just make sure it's understood by the party that you're communicating it to that it's to be kept confidential. It doesn't have to be under some ironclad non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement necessarily. For patent or design purposes, it is good to have an agreement, though. So I would suggest that if you have an invention or you have a new product and you want to get protection for it, that you talk to a patent attorney or an IP lawyer early about it. You don't have to necessarily overcommit to that. You don't have to necessarily open your wallet, right early on, but talk to somebody early so you can get the right strategy in place and make an informed decision about it. It's not cheap, but sometimes there can be real value in these inventions that you're going to create. And that little last comment there, once the cat's out of the bag, it's difficult to get it back in. It's true. If you start talking about your invention, shopping it around, people might love it, but it's kind of not yours anymore because you started to share it around. It's really difficult to recover the position if you've done that. So that's it from me. There's my email in case anybody wants to contact me about any of this. Thank you very much.
That was great. Thanks, Sylvan. Hi, everyone. My name's Belinda Smith. I'm a science reporter with the ABC and Radio National. And just to get a feel for the audience, who here has an invention? Don't let the cat out of the bag, for God's sake. Hands up, anyone who has an idea that they think is worth commercialising or... Oh, there's a couple. Excellent, great. I have what I like to call million-dollar ideas all the time, but clearly they haven't worked out. One happened just a couple of weeks ago. I was having a coffee with a friend and he was showing me this app where it shows everything his child gets up to at preschool, except when he goes to the toilet. And I was like, oh, there's an idea. So if anyone wants to talk to me about push notifications later, hit me up. I'll talk to you later, Sylvan. Great. Anyway, let's meet our panel. They have much better ideas than me, obviously. I'll get you all to just introduce yourselves, please, and what your product is.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Geert Hendricks. I'm the founder of a company called Farmall. So we design technology and both hardware and software to educate about growing your own food, either maybe at home or in the office or at school. So, and we design the systems to make that a more successful process than what we are used to.
Hi everybody, I'm Shannon Gilliland. I'm the founder of a product called Pronto Bottle, and we've basically been working on developing our first self-sterilising baby bottle. So if there's some parents in the room, you've probably been through this process yourself. It's actually quite time consuming, and this was founded 4 years ago when I had my daughter and went through the process myself and decided to solve that problem, and that brings us to today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Hans Chen. I'm the founder, CEO of a company called Fab9. We started as a maker space. And last year, because of the pandemic, we had to pivot, change our business. So we've created a product which is basically education product for anyone to learn how to do basic woodworking at home. Essentially, we turned a 6-week in-person course into an online course. And then we ship the materials to the customers' homes. So we're just about to launch this product. But here, because I'm also a community builder, I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. And we have makers in our maker space, which is essentially a membership-based workshop. So I talk to entrepreneurs quite frequently. And so, yeah, this topic is quite interesting. Can't wait to get into it.
Just before we move on, why did you decide to start it in Melbourne, Hans?
Oh, great question. So I moved to Melbourne, Victoria, at the end of 2015 from California. I used to work in semiconductor in SanDisk. So I moved here because I realized that Melbourne is the kind of the design capital in Australia. Many makers, workers, and artisans. So I thought this is a great community to start a maker space. So yeah, and also some of my friends came here as well. So it's always the human element.
Makes life a bit easier, doesn't it? I would love to hear about your eureka moment or your light bulb moment when you realised that your idea actually had something in it. Maybe Gears, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely wasn't part of the confidential element there. I was telling everyone. So the cat was out of the sack. But then initially you need some validation for your ideas as well, I think. So you can't. It's always the chicken or the egg. What comes first? But yeah, it was predominantly on how it inspired people were when I was talking about. Those machines and those vertical farms that could grow food in our restaurants and in our cafes and at home. So, and that inspiration that people got from it gave me the energy to kind of keep pursuing it as well. So that gave the validation to develop it further from that point onwards.
And did you go out to speak to people, or did it just sort of come up in conversation?
Came up in conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, the usual question, what do you do?
Kind of like we were before saying, yeah, I don't have a green thumb and I can kill a cactus, I need some help.
Exactly.
And Shannon?
Mine was probably a little bit different. So when I went through the bottle feeding process, I had a very different habit than most parents. I thought I was very organised as a project manager in a previous work. But I had the habit of running out of bottles when I was out and about. And I spent a fair bit of my time to start off with actually travelling with my daughter. And my initial idea was actually around solving that very specific problem for myself. Luckily, though, I have some studies in entrepreneurship and innovation. So the first thing I did, which is probably a bad thing considering the conversation we've just had about IP, is I actually went out and I interviewed and surveyed other parents and said, how are you travelling with your baby? And I realised the biggest pain point wasn't the fact of running out of something. It was actually the amount of stuff that parents were carrying with them and the time-consuming process it was. So my eureka moment was actually trying to solve that. And I remember sitting at my computer and just went, rather than building backwards to try and lessen stuff, if the ultimate thing could exist, would it be possible to travel with an empty bottle? And could you sterilise anywhere with that empty bottle? And that's where the idea, that was the big eureka moment.
Hans, when people pre-pandemic came to Fab9, what was it about their inventions, or even just the people themselves, which really got you excited about their projects?
The makerspace? Or?
Yeah, the entrepreneurs that would come to you.
Yeah, so I wanted to build makerspace before I came to Australia.
Yeah, right.
So I came here with a very singular goal to do this, and I discovered makerspace when I was working in the Bay Area, so San Francisco Bay Area. I was a member at a makerspace, and I really enjoyed being within the community. I was actually not making any things, like physically things, but I was enjoying the community, enjoyed talking to other entrepreneurs about their projects. So I was really drawn to the community, kind of a place where I belong, right? So I was really drawn to the entrepreneurial community. And the problem I was trying to solve, and knowing that, because I was working in technology industry, is that for people developing a physical hardware product, again, just anything that's not just pure software, is extremely hard. And it's very much cross-disciplinary. So for example, for a baby bottle, you would need mechanical engineer, you would need electronics engineer, hardware engineer, you need firmware engineer. You may have an app, right? And then you may have application, software development, cloud computing, and that's just the development side. So I wanted to create an ecosystem or environment in which entrepreneurs who have an idea can prototype really quickly. So that's kind of the original, kind of the ethos of Makerspace.
Yep. Are you able to talk about a couple of the projects that you've got going at the moment?
Within my community?
Yeah.
So a majority of our members are hobbyists. People want to make, furniture or, piece of furniture, or say, like this table, for example. If you want to make this yourself, you don't want to buy this as a consumer, you want to create things, you can come to our makerspace. We do have some founders as well. I use the word founders and entrepreneurs interchangeably. So, for example, Dennis, he graduated from our space, but he raised funding, but he was building an electric vehicle motorcycle.
Wow.
So that's, again, technology. But then there's also, there's another customer, Clara, so she was making baby bow ties. So this is actually a really genius idea. Baby bow ties, but on subscription. So each month, the mom will get the consumer, obviously, is the mom, not the kid. The mom will get in the mail maybe 2 or 3 baby bow ties, and then they can kind of have this mother-daughter time, play time, or bonding time, and so she's actually doing really, really well as a business because organically growing and then on subscription. In that case, the makerspace, we helped the entrepreneur with cutting fabric. So she used to cut it by hand, and we have a CNC machine. So you can imagine that if you have fabric on a CNC machine and you have a direct knife, then you can cut many patterns quickly. So that part was done by a machine, but obviously still hand-stitched as a handmade product. But one of the process was kind of automated.
Mm-hmm. Wow, such a varied bunch of projects going on there. That sounds amazing. So we've talked a little bit about the light bulb moment. Now I'd like to get some tips for the people in the audience. So we've already had a few IT tips, IP tips there from Sylvan, but what did you really focus on at the start? What were the most important things for you to get your ideas off the ground?
Can I go first?
Please.
Because I'm going to take a contrarian view. For early stage company, you really want to share your ideas as loudly, as widely as possible. So I'll explain why. The reason is less to do with protecting your idea. The reason is to attract other people who are passionate about your idea. So they come and join you on a journey. So majority of ideas are not good ideas. It's whatever people think of is probably already done, right? So this is just a fact. I often see people get too excited about the idea. You kind of want to fall in love with the problem you're solving, not the solution. most people think too much about solution, they don't think about the problem. So essentially they spend a lot of time trying to solve a problem that does not exist. What I mean by that is when they launch the product, nobody buys it. Okay, so really focus on understanding the problem statement really, really well. And the reason to shout out on the top of the on the rooftop is not to it's not to do with the IP as much as actually to attract other people who may say, oh wow, I'm passionate about that goal, right? I'm passionate about solving that problem as well. I want to come and join you. When I say come and join you, it can be an investor, it can be a co-founder, it can be people like myself. I just like new ideas, and I can perhaps put people in touch with other people who may be able to help. So that's for that reason. And in terms of IP protection, I think you have to get to certain traction that you know that's going to work, and that will have to involve with some kind of technology. If it's purely just the look, it's very easy to kind of work around it. So that's a reality. Is it's very, very hard to have an original idea.
I'll jump in and just totally agree with you in terms of testing your idea out. I used to work in app development, and the amount of people that used to come up to me and say, oh, I've got this great idea, and I'd listen to it for 2 seconds and say, have you done any research? Have you spoken to whoever might be a potential customer? And you realise that there is just so many products out there. It does make use to not just think it's your own great idea and this is the thing to run with, to actually test that idea, hence why doing customer interviews with people who could be potential customers, not selling them on your idea, but simply teasing out what is the experience that they're having there day to day, who might be surrounding that problem you're trying to solve, and really digging into what is the actual problem. So yeah, totally agree.
And also just remember that to solve that problem, there can be 10 different ways to do it. So does that make sense? Like, you don't have to disclose how you're going to solve it. You can just understand the problem first, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like, when I went around that process, I didn't say to people, hey, I'm developing a baby bottle. I simply said to people, how are you travelling with your baby? And I did this process in libraries and in cafes. So not only was I listening to what people were telling me, I could actually see and literally experience what they were going through, because they were there at that time, feeding their baby, changing their baby, and telling me what they're actually going through. So it was quite an important process to go through.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. Having a market and having a validated approach, more than a physical product to disclose, but a validated approach towards that market is extremely important. And if that's not the case, then you can have the best IP in the world or the best patent in the world. If there's no market to actually go into, then the value of that is still very low, again, let's say.
Right, so you've got your idea, you've sussed it out, you've figured out that people have this problem that you want to solve. Then what's the most important thing? Is it getting the funding? Is it kind of getting the marketing sorted? Obviously the IP is a big thing. Yeah, for you guys, really, what was the main focus once you had your idea?
I'll jump in for a sec. So it's a bit difficult when you're working in hardware because there's so many different moving parts. Like Hans was saying before, you've got to try and work out whether the product functions. You've got to get people around you. You've got to build a company. You've got to protect your IP. You've also got to get people involved and get investors excited, because at some stage, the next step will be to actually go through that investment round and get people in and involved so you can actually go through those next stages. So for us, it's less about a singular thing and more about multiple moving parts at once. So it's a little bit difficult to answer, yeah.
Sure, yep. Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Get anything to similar experience?
Yeah, for us it was very much the lean startup approach, the minimal viable product, and actually getting it out there, actually getting it out in the market, getting some initial revenue from that, getting some money on the books as well. But that's extremely valuable, even though it's not a perfect product yet, or it's not in a finished mode. Having it at that minimal viable stage allows the customer to trial it, and it exposes a lot of assumptions that you would have made that how it works or how people are going to interact with it, and that allows you to redesign or to reassess or to change and pivot, and improve your products as well from the back of house, actually come to a stage where you actually do have something that is user-friendly, that's market-friendly, and that you can actually start protecting from there onwards. I think for us the most important thing from the start was protecting the brand, so the trademarks and all the IP around our reputation, like you mentioned, more than the product, and actually building the brand and the reputation of the brand, and then later on followed by more detailed design protection.
That's right.
I was just going to jump in and say along that lines of when you're going through those processes, we made a mistake that Sylvan was talking about in terms of disclosing to public. And one thing that entrepreneurs can come a crop of is going to pitch events. So you go to pitch events to sort of get people into the idea of your product and to either get funding or to get prizes or just to get some practice in. And we did this process February 2019. We attended our first pitch event. It was the first time we publicly disclosed our product. And then when we went to actually do patenting, we had to backdate it from that first publicly disclosed date as well. So I think it was 9 months later or something, we actually went through that. But it was an interesting lesson to learn, and something I warn entrepreneurs of is, yes, go have your interviews, be careful not to disclose too much, but be aware when you are doing things like attending events and pitching, just to make sure, or be careful of what you're disclosing if you can avoid disclosing the actual trade secret part of it or the actual technical part of it, just be aware of that.
That is so interesting, and that leads into, I guess, my next question. In hindsight, what would you have done differently? What do you wish you knew, maybe in the early stages of developing your ideas? Got another one, Shannon?
Besides how hard it is. Or do you want to go, Hans?
Yeah, it's extremely hard to start a company.
Yeah.
So I think the best way to describe it is that it's actually 2 marathons, right? The first marathon is the product, developing a product and actually works, and figure out who's going to pay for it, at what price, where do you actually make it, global supply chain, which is a different topic. And the second marathon is actually building a company. So I think the IP protection comes in the kind of the second part of building a company, and that involves fundraising, your marketing, your operations. So imagine doing 1 marathon is already really, really hard, and then you have to do another one at the back of it. So
I think COVID happens and you start sprinting your marathon.
Geert, was there anything that you wish you knew way back when? No?
Yeah, probably lots of things, but on the other hand, it's also the journey that makes it all worthwhile, and you learn things exactly when you need them and when they're important, and probably I've really enjoyed the experience of having mentors around me and a really good support system, either through an accelerator or an incubator or through the workspaces that you're in like these. So that's definitely something if I look back at the early days, I would have really focused on that even more, to have a really good community of people around me, like a maker space, like an incubator space to actually bounce off, because you can't know everything when you're building a business, and there's so many traps and do's and don'ts, and it's very easy to get distracted and to spend money on things that you shouldn't be spending money on. $100,000 has gone very quickly when you're developing a product, and when it's gone, it's like you gotta commercialize and be ready to find funding in different ways. So that ongoing need for cash flow is extremely important. So, and make your decisions on where you spend your money wisely, and when you do spend it, make sure it's worthwhile.
And the other thing I would add is I think mental health is critical. I think everybody experienced the lockdown, the great lockdown. I think we all can appreciate that mental health is critical. Doesn't matter what you do, as a founder especially, because founders are under extreme pressure from, you're working crazy hours and your family don't really get it. Like, my father still didn't understand why I quit my job after 5 years. And it's like, why did you quit SanDisk? Well, I said, well, Dad, SanDisk is no longer there, right? It's got acquired. So, having a support network is really critical. Make sure you founders should also have founder friends who understand what the journey, and also make friends with lawyers and accountants. Because if they can just give you some advice like for free, then it's like gold. Seriously, like definitely have a good lawyer friend, IP attorney, or
That's what coffee dates are for.
because sometimes you cannot know what you don't know, right? Just impossible. You just don't know what you don't know, right? So again, hats off to all the founders. This is not easy, and we need more founders in Australia, for sure, to rebuild better, to build a knowledge-based export, right? Exporting software, exporting hardware, exporting solutions, professional services, exporting food, agri-tech. It's a lot of stuff, but not dirt, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Totally agree. Mental health and also the ways in which you spend money and funding can kind of just disappear so quickly because you can get sidetracked and distracted by things. And if there's probably something I would have said that if I had my time again, I would have felt like I should say I would have purely focused on product development. I would have purely just spent my time and my money on just building the product, proving that it works, getting it to a stage where it was the MVP, it is the proof of concept model. But if I had done that, I wouldn't have gone through an acceleration program. I wouldn't have gone through 2 crowdfunding campaigns. One of them failed terribly the first time. It failed in terms of it didn't raise funds, but the good thing is the PR I got out of it. And because of that, I then had one of the big competitor companies come to us because of that. So in hindsight, it seems great to say, shucks, I wish I hadn't have done that. But if I hadn't have taken those steps, if I hadn't failed in certain ways, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have had those learning lessons. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, but totally agree with the two of you. It's a hard journey. Mental health, the way you spend funds and trying to build relationships with people, it's never a straight A to B line. It's like A, Z, C, D, F.
Spell out whatever word you like there. Let's hear from some of the founders in the audience. Are there any questions? We've got a roving mic, which can come to you. Anyone? It is quiet. There we go.
Thanks. You made a reference to it before, the catch-22 of protecting your IP and validating your product, and I've well and truly fell into that trap. So what advice would you have for any other founders in the room in terms of, at what point, do you sort of draw the line on validation versus actually protecting the IP?
All right, who wants to pick up that thorny question?
I'd say when someone wants to pay money for it. If you actually for the moment you start seeing actual paying customers, I think that's the validate at the price that you need to get your gross profit margin up.
One of the challenges is to get to the point of paying customers. Thanks. Yeah, to get to the point of paying customers, obviously you need to have shared the idea, and to do that, our lawyer's advice was, protect your IP first. So we piled a whole bunch of money into IP protection before we'd really validated the idea, and then as a result of that, eventually that money became, lost money. So there is a catch-22 there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because you can get to the point where you've, like even with us, our initial design that we were working on, the patents that we've filed for that now has really kind of gotten to a point where it's almost invalid because we've moved beyond our initial patent. So you can say goodbye to that money, right? So there is a catch-22. You've got to work out what's your version of validating. Are you validating it for an investor or are you validating it for yourself to prove that the product actually functions? And I think those two things will decide how you approach that process, and at what point you finally pull and say, okay, now's the time for us to patent that. And even if you do patent it, it'll probably be different from what Sullivan might think as well, is, are you hoping to develop the product yourself or are you hoping to license it? Because there's the question then even, if you sell it off, do you need to patent it? Will the other company patent it for you? Because the situation we're in, it's possible that the company we're speaking to will actually patent that product for us. So different situations, yeah. But speak to him afterwards.
You got his email address, that's great. Anyone else? Come on, we've got this amazing set of brains here to pick. Excellent, thank you.
Did any of you ever think about approaching local organisations as well as state government for grants that might enable you to push through that pain barrier, I would call it, of putting your own funds out there?
It's a great question.
So Fab 9, we actually received a grant from LaunchFig. So that enabled us to get started. So yes, we did. And I was quite lucky. I was being in the right place at the right time. I pitched the government and with some PowerPoints. Extremely lucky. If now thinking back, it's like, wow, that was like almost impossible. Yeah, so that's our story. But we had to now pivot because of COVID. So our company direction is shifting. But yes, it's how it got started.
The other thing is, like, I think people assume that just getting a grant is pretty easy. It's a time commitment to go into that grant process, and as we've discussed before, we put a lot of hours into multiple different fields in product development and building your company at the same time. But also you find that quite a lot of the grants are actually one for one, so you have to find the same amount of money to put in at the same time for that grant. So at the time as you're trying to raise funds and then writing the grant application and hoping that the fundraising you're doing actually occurs and you hit it so that you can actually get that grant at the same time. And in those grants at times, like we're looking at the commercialisation grant for us because we're in manufacturing, it's not a, hey, you've gotten the cash, it's a paid out quarterly over a 2-year period, and that process in itself takes a year. So
sell in the meantime.
Yeah, and that's it. So it's not as easy as just kind of plucking it off the tree and going, yes, I got a grant.
There is the R&D research, the research and development grant, which is always a nice to have every year, because that's not sure what the exact calculation, but I think it's about 43 cents to the dollar spent on specific research and specific projects that you've undertaken, and then every year kind of it takes quite a bit of work to apply for, but it's worthwhile every year. But again, that's money going back that you've already spent. To actually get cash beforehand, there's many options to apply for grants. I have become a bit cautious in how I spent my time, because I had a period where I spent quite a lot of time on applying for grants, but that wasn't really returning for the time that was being put in. So at the moment, I'll only really invest the time in the grant when the guarantee of getting it is quite high. Or I really like applying for grants when I need to kind of look back at the business, because it's an ideal moment often to kind of those questions that are asked in a grant, they're really good reflecting moments as well. So if the questions are good enough to actually bring you that reward of reflection together with actually doing the application, I think it's worthwhile. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Actually talked about having a mentor, which I find fascinating. None of you mentioned that.
I was going to say, I do actually have a mentor. I had a mentor from probably the beginning of this project or midway through the project. And that was randomly was actually my neighbour. A random conversation where I had my daughter strapped to me going for a walk, and he stopped and we got chatting, and he was a part of the Swinburne program, actually founding some of the entrepreneurship and innovation programs there. So I was very lucky. It doesn't happen very often. But yeah, but definitely having a mentor is very important if you can, because you have somebody who's ideally been there before or has industry experience. They know the pitfalls and they can stand back from being in the middle of it like you are, because sometimes you can get stuck in your own head thinking a certain way. So it's good to have somebody that pulls you out of that and says to you, hang on a second, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Because we can get passionate. We can get, oh, this is a great idea and we're going to get stuck into this and this is how I'm going to build it. But then to have that second view is very, very important. Yeah, great question.
And the student is ready, the teacher appears.
No, that's great. Hans, do you have anything to add?
Finding mentors, I think, is sometimes not as easy as it sounds, because it's kind of one-on-one relationships. Like, you know, I definitely think it's very, very important, but it's something that I think is sometimes not like I want to find a mentor by Tuesday. It's not like finding a professional services like lawyer or accountants. It's not transactional. Just you know, it's not a transactional relationship. And I think sometimes people think, oh, we don't have. It's a one-way. It's actually not a one-way street, by the way. The mentor needs to get something back as well. So sometimes it could be the founder's passion, or you know, wanting to make a difference, or want to have some kind of positive impact to the world. So I would suggest for founders in the room to think about UN SDGs, so Sustainable Development Goals. So if your vision aligns with one or two, it's great. If it's not, then you know, think about those kind of goals, and because people want to help other people who want to make a positive impact, right? That's really about this. So I think that if you can say, hey, I'm gonna alleviate poverty, fantastic. I'm sure you find a lot of mentors.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have time for another one, I think.
If you're building your team of people around you to help you, what personality traits would you be seeking from those different people, and how many would there be?
Ooh, nice.
So the question is, when you're recruiting early staff, is that the question?
Well, we talked about the fact that you need your mental health and you need your family around you to support you. We've talked about the fact that it's useful having a mentor. It's useful having someone to bounce the idea off confidentially. Is there anybody else that you need to have around to help get that idea through, or is it someone you have on your team as the tea lady or the tea person or the person who always brings you coffee at the right time or whatever else?
Yeah, I might answer this one. In reality, you need a lot of different skills on a team. But in the beginning, I found it's not necessarily about a high level of skill. It's more about a high level of persistence and willing to give it a go. Because it's not always in a startup, you can't pay market rate wages. It's not a 9-to-5 commitment, so it's the kind of, the people that bring joy and bring a bit of culture and happiness, but also kind of like can bite themselves into a problem and get stuck in it and go all the way. And I think in the last 4 years of our journey, there's very few people that enter a team and that can really go all the way when it's required, or that can go along with the pace that a startup goes at, if you're not necessarily being paid the market rate for it. And then, of course, there's equity, but equity only becomes valuable when the company becomes valuable, is valuable, let's say. And yeah, maybe that's a lesson that we learned very early stage. When you're not paying people, make sure that they sign over their RP properly. And we had a case where we had someone on the team who wasn't paid. Neither of us were paid, and but we had the documentation in place. We didn't have the documentation in place where his IP was properly signed over to the company, and was all based on trust. And when we were going through our first pre-seed fundraise, that came up, and he demanded more equity than he was entitled to. That's a moment where we spent quite a bit on legal and learned a really valuable lesson there as well. So do make sure that when you have people helping you in the company, that's just make that little formality like, thank you for helping me, but like it's important for the business that every hour that you spend here, paid or not paid, that the IP is owned by the business.
Are you able to tell us the outcome of that little?
It's debt equity.
Oh, okay.
It's a very difficult moment because you can't really. Because when you're just in front of a fundraise, and it's just something, if you haven't signed it off, you can't do much. You can negotiate in the best possible way, and that's where the nature of the people comes in place. But at that stage, you got to keep moving, and you got to get that company through the fundraise, and no investor will finalize the fundraise if you got an open employee contractor or an open IP case. They're the two things that are really big red flags. So if you find yourself in that position, you just got to bite the bullet and know that they'll be diluted in the future and with further fundraisers. But it also showed character, and that person didn't spend another second in the company ever after. So yeah.
Moving on and up then. Let's not finish on that note. How about another question?
Just a really quick one for Shannon. Being a female founder, I'm also part of the Australian Legal Tech Association, where we're conducting research on female founders in legal tech and the funding options available. And we know only 2% of funding actually gets put to female founders, and we encounter quite a lot of unusual situations in that process. Was that a part of the reason you went for crowdfunding, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So we tried to basically fundraise from the worst time. We launched the fundraising round in February last year. Clearly a bad time to try and do so. So we spent 9 months trying to fundraise through the typical channels. We already had a VC on our cap table because of the acceleration program we'd gone through. So we had to go through, do the typical pitching events that we did with them to get approval. We did wind up luckily winning 3 tranches of funding from them. But then it all basically dried up. So everyone was trying to obviously protect themselves, protect their current portfolio, keep funds aside, but it was still very difficult. And there are questions as to whether it's just a baby bottle is not sexy, or whether it's a female founder. I don't want to put anything out there, but you know, it could be a number of things. So in the end, we realised we had a certain amount of runway left, and we had to take the fundraising quite literally into our own hands, and that's why we went through and launched the equity crowdfunding round end of last year, and that was, I think, October, November, and we went through the virtual platform, and it was very much a hands-on, just heads down, bum up fundraise, and it was just all hands on deck. We just did it ourselves, hired people to work with, but yeah, getting funds for women is difficult, and I'm not sure if, but it's even more difficult for those of a different racial background too, so that's got to be noted, yeah.
I know, isn't it a new long-vic sidecar thing?
The sidecar is actually for the angel investors, but the Boosting Female Founders is the grant that we applied for last year. But here's the crux of it. The equity that I have in the company is actually in a trust, and that trust is half owned by my partner and myself because of our daughter. So we were denied that because of that reason. So I've actually now this year reapplied, but I had to take my partner off of the trust to be able to do so. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the laws are meant to help, but the devil's in the details, right? Devil's in the details. I don't have anything to add, but yeah, no, keep going.
Awesome. Oh, one more,
yep.
Beauty. Thank you.
You guys have given advice on like mentors and grants. What advice would you give on getting investors?
Have you got like days? I've actually, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Clubhouse app, but I think I've spent the last 2 weeks soaked in that at the moment. And on getting investors, I'd say be very strategic, actually plan it out. I found that I've realised belatedly that I've been quite haphazard at my investor approaches. Go through, use things like Crunchbase, Gust, PitchBook, research who the investors are, look at the company that you are yourself, what stage your startup is at, look at the company, the investors, look at the raise amounts. Don't trust via their website that what they say is early stage, we invest in this. quite often isn't the point, which can be very frustrating for startups going through this in the fundraising process. Look at the Crunchbase app, have a look at who they've invested in, what companies are aligned and similar to yours. Actually go out and reach out to those companies who have been funded previously and ask what that investors are like, and then ask for a warm introduction through that founder. It's a lot easier to get warm introductions that way as well. So, but yeah, be very, very strategic about it, yeah.
Yeah, fundraising is hard. I think the only thing I would add, everything you say, I think is really good advice. I think fundraising, if you don't have the network, it's difficult, right? So, for example, I didn't go to school here. I didn't really work here in a proper job, right? I didn't go to those big companies. So getting access to the network sometimes half the battle. But I think more and more people are turning to the community or the crowdfunding. I think is a viable option. Yeah, so there are kind of open source investor lists that you can find on the website or online, and then you can reach out cold. I've been reaching out to people cold. Has some various success, but let's see how it goes. Hasn't ended, so I just think that sometimes you have to go wide because you cannot really tell if they're really seed round, for example, right?
Yeah, I would agree, and then just go and do the research if you can on the applications like I mentioned before, Crunchbase or Gust or PitchBook, and do agree that sometimes they'll say we're only pre-seed company investor, but then you'll look at the stuff they're investing in and it's everything from seed all the way up to Series A, again, which is just causes frustration. So I've had mixed results with trying to do cold call outs, so same thing. See if you can get a warm introduction, it's always much better, but if you've got no network, I completely understand the frustrations. Last year taught us a lot about trying to fundraise when you couldn't get out, yeah.
Yeah, it's building relationships ongoingly, but when you start speaking to investors, doesn't mean that they're not interested when they're seeing the first pitch deck. You almost have to re-engage with them over and over again, maybe 50 to 100 times, and just like a brief, hey, we spoke not that long ago, just an update here. And I think what I've been using more recently is a Google Drive link. And I could keep the same link and I just update the pitch decks and just keep it very relevant, and keep some of the due diligence folders in there as well, so they've got all the information. And then just send a quick email. Hey, the drive's been updated, pitch deck's been updated. Just have a look. Not even a call to action. Just and that seems to be really appreciated. And then when it comes to the moment when we're pulling around together, I think it's a lot easier that way.
I like that approach. The only thing I would be cautious of is who's got access to that Google Drive and how much you're sharing, because it's quite easy for somebody to on-pass that offer document or the information memorandum to somebody else, and for you not to be able to track that. So it's the only thing I'd be cautious of.
Totally. Gets out the bag.
I think we've pretty much run out of time, everyone. So thank you so much for your lovely questions, and to the panel for your insightful answers. It was really great to hear your own experiences, so varied, and yeah, I'm really pumped that you all made it through the pandemic. It's really great to see that, some things survive. Hans, Shannon and Geert, thank you so very much. It's been a real joy to talk to you on this beautiful autumn night. So thank you so very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us this evening and for hearing from our wonderful lineup of experts. So Greg, who's still up the back there, Sylvan, Shannon, Geert, Hans and Belinda. A big round of applause. Can we give them our thanks? Thank you also to the City of Melbourne and Melbourne Knowledge Week for the opportunity to be part of this year's event. It's really fantastic. Melbourne Knowledge Week is still going till this weekend, so do check out the website. There's lots more events, and the State Library of Victoria is a hub as well, so there's lots of events still to be had. So now our event is officially over. Thank you all again for coming. Please exit through the front doors to Swanston Street. Our team will let you out there at the end. So thank you again and good night.